You never quite know when a good day out on the water is gonna turn into something significantly worse, like this pair found out here near the San Juan Islands, when all of a sudden their sailing vessel became disabled and wound up grounded on the rocks, taking an absolute pounding, as you see in these images here. Fortunately, the Coast Guard was alerted, a rescue vessel was sent to the scene, as well as a helicopter, as it took the efforts of both crews to try and get the pair off of the boat. Really is a wild scene, and just one of the wild scenes we'll witness in this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. Our first story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to South Carolina and the coastline of Myrtle Beach, where this was the scene over the past week. Now you might be wondering, BG, what does this have to do with the boating news? Well, these are wildfires that have broken out in the Carolina Forest area of South Carolina. One of the reasons this is making the boating news is the way they are going about trying to battle these blazes. Here you can see exactly how close these wildfires are burning to homes, but they've called in air support on this one, and they are using Chinook helicopters and airplanes to go ahead and get water and dump on those fires. And this is what makes it part of Boating News of the Week, as this is the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway you can see here, which is a very popular boating destination and a heavily traveled section used by boaters to go up and down the East Coast. But in this heavily traveled section, you better be careful if you're going by now, because right now this is where the helicopters and the airplanes are actually picking up the water that they are using to try and fight and contain the blaze. Here, as you can see, where they're actually pulling the water from on the waterway is a very heavily populated section. Lots of boats, lots of docks, and lots of people. So if you're traveling the waterway, you need to be on the lookout, especially if you're coming through the South Carolina area, because there's not a whole lot of room to work with when these planes are coming in and actually going in to pull the water. I am being told they have moved the section of the waterway they are now pulling from due to the section we just saw being so narrow. They had concerns with all the boats and docks around that it could create an issue with the airplanes coming in, but they were using this section just due to proximity of the fire. Hopefully soon they'll get these fires completely contained. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Hong Kong, where this was the scene just this past weekend, when two box ships wound up colliding into port, causing at least 3 containers to fall into the water. The two ships we see in the images, the blue one is the Clifford Marisk, and the red vessel is the Columbia one, which was inbound to the port at the time of the incident, and it is actually under assist from tug vessels during this incident as well. But there are some oddities to this. Here, if you look to the back of the one Columbia, you're going to see that the actual anchor is deployed for some reason, leading us to believe that there's possibly some sort of mechanical failure that has occurred during this incident. And right here we can see the containers falling off the Marisk ship as the Columbia one is being pulled back off of the vessel. At this time, it is not 100% determined what exactly caused this incident. As we mentioned, the Columbia one, as you can see here, was under assist from tugs during the incident as well, but it's being assumed right now that there was some sort of mechanical failure causing the vessel to not be able to stop before approaching the Marisk vessel. Fortunately, in this situation, no injuries were reported, and the Columbia one has actually already departed and headed toward its next destination, as the damage to the ships was just considered to be superficial. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to the Gulf, where this was the scene just a little over a week ago when the Royal Caribbean cruise ship Brilliance of the Sea wound up rescuing 11 people who were adrift in the Gulf between Cuba and Mexico this past week. The Royal Caribbean cruise ship had departed from New Orleans on this past Saturday for a 7-night cruise. On Wednesday during the trip, the captain happened to spot a vessel off in the distance that appeared to be in distress. The captain quickly decided to turn the cruise ship around and go and investigate the scene. They wound up lowering a pilot vessel, boarded with some crew from the Brilliance of the Sea, to go out and investigate the distressed vessel and see who was on board and what the situation was. As the crew neared the distressed vessel, they noticed 11 people on board, many waving white flags to try and signal they were in distress, and also many bailing water as the vessel had began to take on water and was sinking. Fortunately, the crew was able to pull all 11 people off and coordinated with the Coast Guard and brought them back to the cruise ship, where they will later be transferred to the Coast Guard. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us up to Canada and recap a story we hit on last week, and that's going to be the MSC Baltic 3, which wound up losing power and becoming grounded in a very remote section of Canada about 12 days ago. Fortunately, all the crew was rescued off the 679-foot vessel, but unfortunately, the weather continued to hamper any operations to try and get the vessel ungrounded. The severe weather continued to battle the ship, causing damage to the hull and further grounding the vessel. Fortunately, this past week, the Canadian Coast Guard and private salvage crews were finally able to get on board the vessel and start doing an assessment of the ship. Unfortunately, that assessment was not good. As the Coast Guard released this week, they do not believe the MSC Baltic 3 can safely be refloated. The report claimed that divers in the water were able to go down and inspect the hull, but unfortunately they found significant breaches and holes below the waterline. Crews have quickly switched their efforts to try and remove all fuel and hazardous material off the vessel, and the next step will be trying to get the cargo off the boat, but unfortunately due to the remoteness of this location, it's going to be an extremely long and difficult process. Currently at this time, it is estimated there's approximately 1.7 million liters of heavy fuel and oil and marine gas on board the ship, and MSC initially advised the Coast Guard that the vessel had approximately 470 containers on board as well, over half of which were reported to be empty though. The others are carrying items such as food, lumber, and paper supplies. In the latest update though, the Coast Guard did however claim that 8 containers with polymer beads had been marked for priority removal. But before anything can be removed, there's still a lot of things that have to happen. Currently, this boat is in a bad spot and winter storms continue to pound the area, increasing the possibility of the vessel taking on severe damage, possibly losing fuel and cargo. But also the Coast Guard claims there's really no way to get to this at this time to try and unload the cargo, as there's no real access roads that have the availability for them to get tractor trailers out to try and take the cargo off the vessel. The Coast Guard says it is looking into alternatives, including repairing an old road and all-terrain vehicle trail that could be used to reach the remote location. They also claim that the road would need significant upgrades to be able to handle the heavy equipment and tractor trailers needed to try and get all the cargo off the ship. The Coast Guard's also talking about how they're going to have to build an access point from the shoreline to the bow of the vessel to try and get the cargo off the ship. But the bigger question here is, what is going to be the fate of the MSC Baltic 3? Will this be its final resting place, where it will become one of those ghost ships on an abandoned shoreline? And right now, while that's not a definitive answer, it's going more and more that it may actually wind up being that situation. But let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on this. I mean, the ship really is getting pounded, and the longer it sits here, the likelihood of it being recovered becomes less and less every single day. But thanks for watching, crew. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening on your waterways, be sure to hit us up on Facebook or Instagram and let us know, and you might see your stories over here. Just like Mike Lubinsky, Terry St. Clair, and T. Johnson79 did this week. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button here. If not, we're coming to steal your drain plug.